Thank you very much. It's really fun for me to be here. It's fun for me to spend time with Beth again. It's been a while since we had a chance to hang out. It's great to have met some of you, and hopefully I'll have a chance to meet a few more of you before I go. As Beth said, I don't have a formal presentation here. I would just really like to talk with you about issues surrounding validity in qualitative research. And I titled this discussion as "How Could I Be Wrong?", which I stole that phrase from Joe Maxwell, who is another qualitative researcher and ethnographer, who has a wonderful book called Qualitative Research Design, which if you have not seen and read that book, I would highly recommend it to you. It is written specifically for graduate students who are getting started with their research. And it's a very easy to read, straightforward kind of how to do it book with including examples from some of his students who were working on their dissertations when he was writing the book, and so he stole some things from them to put into the book. What's that?
There's a lot of thieving.
There's a lot of thieving, yeah, really. Okay, so in Maxwell's book, in the chapter on validity, it is entitled How Could I Be Wrong, or How Could You Be Wrong? And I do think that is the question that we need to face as qualitative researchers. When we are presenting our findings, when we are talking about the kind of work that we do, it can sometimes be hard to justify what we've done and to make clear how we found what we've found. And this has created, as I'm sure you're aware, a power differential with respect to policymakers, some legislators, other powerful people who have, for one reason or another, decided that they should discount qualitative research. They should not fund it, they should not pay attention to it, they should not worry about it. There is a contingent of people out there like that, but most people are more thoughtful than that. But they do need some help, I think, in understanding. Many people need some help in understanding the way in which qualitative researchers arrive at their findings or conclusions, and the reasons why they chose to pursue the work in the way that they did. And some way of, they need to be convinced that the findings are worth paying attention to, that they are credible in some way. So I'd like to start by just asking you for what your experiences have been with this, with the challenges of trying to justify qualitative research or provide a rationale for the research that you do, or to explain the findings that you have in such a way that people take them seriously. So, anybody want to start us off? What are some of the challenges that you faced, or even if you haven't faced them, questions you have about your own work, how people might doubt it, question it, dismiss it? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Margaret Eisenhart. I'm a second year PhD student in health education. And one of the issues that came up in the process of me trying to publish my master's thesis was the question of quantity of participants, whether or not that's enough, if I had enough participants to make the propositions and arguments that I was making, enough data to support it. So I wanted to know if you could talk more about the question of quantity when it comes to qualitative research in the publication process.
And how many participants did you
I
have?
had 4 participants for a narrative study.
And it was a narrative study?
Yeah.
So one strategy is to say what you've said, which is that I'm using a particular kind of methodological approach, the narrative research approach, and it doesn't require a lot of big numbers to justify its existence. Another way to do it is to try to appeal to some other source of information to support the claims that you're making with the 4 participants. So if you can say that you did a pilot study and it's consistent, the results of your pilot study are consistent with the new study that you're reporting, then that is a way of increasing the numbers, maybe not by a lot, but at least by some. These are all inspired really by positivist issues and concerns about the size of your sample and the consistency of raters' responses to, or reviewers' responses, analysts' responses to participants' answers to questions and things like that. What about trying to explain this or justify it in qualitative terms? What could you say? What might you say?
What I found helpful is talking about how qualitative research seeks to answer different types of questions, and therefore it often doesn't matter. The number of participants isn't a good measure of what makes a study valid, and sort of especially when talking to people from quantitative backgrounds, pointing out the type of research you do answers certain types of questions, and having a lot of participants is a good thing for that type of research. I'm doing a different type of research that asks different questions, and so I just don't use that measure.
Mm-hmm. What about approaching it from the standpoint of arguing that it's valuable to have a small sample? What would you say about that? How could you argue that it was valuable to have a small sample? I'm trying to get you to go on the offensive here with this stuff, rather than being putting yourself in a defensive position vis-a-vis what you think the quantitative researchers or the people with that orientation expect to see. So what's the value of having a small sample? Just a few people. Depth, absolutely. You mentioned context. That's another one. You can pay a lot of attention to context. Rapport.
Building relationships, easier for small.
Building relationships.
I mean, at the risk of sounding unintellectual, I think you would have a deeper understanding of the human experience with a smaller sample because of all of these things that you could do. Building deeper relationships, understanding context, being connected to the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. What else? Yes.
A lot of the arguments I'm hearing is because we have time constraints, physical, financial, whatever, all these constraints, if you want to deeply understand something, you can't interview 100 people. You have to do 4 to do a narrative. But in this hypothetical world, if we could interview 100, would that be better? I'd like to make the argument that not necessarily, for the very point that qualitative research is not interested in making the population one holistic entity that has some sort of homogeneity through it that you're trying to describe generally, but rather that the individual is what matters. That's the very precise object of our research question, like you were saying. The research question has shifted. We care about that one single person and how they experienced their whatever, the event, whatever it was that you were investigating. And so there's value, even if it happened to one person out of 7 billion, there's value in knowing what that was like for that one person.
And what is the value of that?
I think also qualitative researchers often select as their focal participants those who sort of fall as the outliers in a larger study. And what happens then if you have 100 participants is those 4 whose experiences may be vastly different are subsumed in the average and their voices completely lost.
We can respect our participants more. We can treat them as a real human, not as a number. That's also at the pro side of a small number.
Okay. So this issue we've been talking about: sample size, small versus large. Other issues, other challenges. In addition to that one, yes.
Just listening to what was being said over here, I was wondering how you go about articulating, which seems to be a lot of the legwork of your sort of analysis and research, which is those debrief sessions, which are those conversations that you may have consistently have over a period of time, which ultimately, if you have a group of researchers and they're all coding, and then you come back to each other, and then you sort of recalibrate your thinking a little bit, and then you read a little more literature, and then you come back to each other, and then things keep shifting sort of slightly. And I was wondering how you sort of articulate that as a part of the research process, because it seems to be pretty central.
Yeah, I think it is pretty central. Well, there's a lot of issues that I think are embedded in this conversation in general. One of them has to do with just what is acceptable in terms of a journal length article or even a book, where, in my experience anyway, there's a reluctance to put this kind of information in, certainly in a journal article, because it takes too much time. And even in my experience writing books, the editors have wanted that sort of detail to go into an appendix, or maybe not even go into the book at all. So I think we face an uphill battle with regard to that. But I think that I think there are ways that we can think creatively about maybe just having a table display of some kind, which through your journaling or other kinds of ways that you keep track of what's going on through your analysis process, you are able to indicate steps in the process. So you don't have to don't have to go through all of the shifts and modifications and alterations that you made substantively, but you can display the process that you went through. I think that qualitative researchers often do have a more systematic process than they describe in their work, but there are ways to do it that wouldn't take that much space. Similar with the narrative research, that is a particular form of analyzing material, and I would think that you ought to be able to, in that case, reference other pieces of literature where they talk about the narrative analysis, and then specify the key steps that you took in your process that were either consistent with the model, or if they're inconsistent, then that's okay too. You just need to give a justification for why in this particular case there would not be, it was not possible to be consistent, or there was some reason why you chose not to do that. Another thing I want to say about this topic in general is that I do think it's really important that your findings are important. And I think if you can make clear that your findings are important, that there's something new, something exciting, something innovative, something startling, something that people haven't thought about before, that the concern about method will sort of fall away. The concern about these quantitative kinds of indicators of validity and reliability will sort of fall away, because you can impress people with the power of your findings. That is really something that qualitative researchers, I think, have an ability to do in a very strong way. And when we get into these situations where we feel like we have to systematize our presentation of our studies to make them consistent with the way quantitative researchers present their studies, I think that is taking us down a path that's not very productive for us. It's not very useful for us. Because if you have to present all this stuff about your research problem and your conceptual framework and your methodology before you get to the findings, which is the general strategy in many academic types of publication, then you are kind of foregrounding in your written presentation or even in your spoken presentation, you're foregrounding the I don't want to say the weakness, but the difference between qualitative and quantitative research, or the difference between experimental and more naturalistic research. So I'm beginning to think, and I do, Beth will know this, I mean, when I teach qualitative methods, I teach, okay, you need a problem, you need a purpose, you need a set of research questions, you need a conceptual framework. You need all that, particularly to get approval from your committee and to get funding for your projects and things like that. But once you've done those kinds of hoop jumping through things, and it's up to you to present the results of your work, I really think that it makes more sense for qualitative researchers to lead with their findings, or at least to point to the findings, make the findings sound important. Make clear to your readers why these findings are important. Then after that, you can explain the details of how you got to this point. And maybe there'll be some quibbles about, well, if you did it this other way, or you talked to different people, or you had a second person review your work, or whatever, it could have been stronger. But by that time, you have already convinced people that you've got something to say. And I really think that could make a difference in the way this kind of research is taken up. Now, it could mean that you have to fight with journal editors about, right? Mm-hmm. Like you, about this kind of thing. It may be a fight that we need to take up in a way that we haven't taken up before, but I think it's a fight worth having, because I think that the value of the findings of qualitative research are really where our strength lies. And I would like to suggest that we argue about that rather than argue about whether you've got 5 or 10 or 20 or 500 people in your sample. I'd also rather fight about that than things like inter-rater reliability, although I think there is a way to establish inter-rater reliability if you need to do that for a qualitative.
When do you need to do that?
Well, what do you think? When do you need to do that? Have you been in a position when they asked you to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And what was it?
I said that the way we were conceptualizing the study, it didn't make sense.
Okay.
That 2 people would come to the same conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
That there was this interaction between the researcher and the data that's unique. And so what I said is that we have to make the burden of the argument on me as a writer rather than in terms of the inter-rater reliability of the coders. Because writing's more important than the coding.
Mm-hmm. So this was in a situation where you had coded,
Mm-hmm.
and you had multiple people coding, or?
Yes. And theoretically, I guess I could have done correlations, but that doesn't fit in the way I think of the world. And it got published, so.
Yeah, this is another one of my hobby horses. I think that inter-rater reliability, or reliability in general, is very overrated. I don't think it applies very well to qualitative research because, as Beth said, at least in the kind of most narrow sense of reliability or replication, the idea that someone else would exactly replicate what a first researcher had done is really quite unlikely and not very interesting at all. If you think of the point of qualitative research as introducing people to something new, surprising, different, all those kinds of things, then why would you want to do a study where you just tried to find out whether you got exactly the same thing as the person before you? That's not where our strength lies. So I think it's much more important to talk about validity than it is about reliability. And one of the ways that you have good validity, I think, in a qualitative study, it could be argued that you have very low reliability in order to have good validity, because you don't, to have good validity, I would think you would want a range of perspectives represented. So if you have different kinds of people reading and coding data, what you would want to see is where the differences are, not where the similarities are, because the differences allow you to broaden, to spread, to think in more comparative ways about what is going on in your data. And so if you think of just a simple situation where, maybe in my study of college women, we found this culture of romance, all of the researchers in that study were women. So what if we had had some men researchers reading our data and coding our data and thinking about our data? Well, we probably would have had a different story to tell. And it would have been interesting to have had that story as part of the overall story. So I do think that, I think there are ways that we can argue about these things that are true to the way qualitative research is organized, and also plays to its strengths rather than trying to make up for weaknesses that have been identified by other people as being relevant. I mean, some cases they may be relevant, but in other cases not. Leslie.
I have two thoughts spurred by what you just said. The first, I agree with you that inter-rater reliability is such a misapplication, in many cases, a misapplied qualitative research. And I wonder, though, what we can think about the process of how we can better explain all the negotiation and theoretical generation that goes on during the process of coding by yourself, with another person, or with a group as part of validity. That's my first thought. Mm-hmm. My second thought has two parts. One is that I think it's really, I would like to publicly say how much I feel like you've done to represent what validity means in qualitative work to the field of educational research. I think that's incredibly valuable to all of us.
That's very nice.
And it links then to a second piece, which is I've struggled a lot with Maxwell's question, how could you be wrong? Because on the one hand, I think it's important that there's a chance we're wrong. I think too often we're doing research where there's really just no chance we're wrong. And that's problematic. On the other hand, I think, well, is that the right question, or is it, how could I be more or less convincing in my interpretation? And those are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I struggle with that. Like, I want there to be the chance that we're wrong, but then I feel like, is wrong really even the right word for what we understand validity to be in qualitative work? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes.
One thought that I've never had before, but your comment just brought it to me, so and I'm happy with it. I'd be curious to see what you guys think is, I think when some people assume wrong, they assume there's an opposite, which is the right. I think you can be wrong, but there also can never be one right. There are a lot of rights you could get to, but you could also get to something that's kind of wrong, problematic. So wrong is one of the options of being in all of these other possibilities of more rightness, I guess you'd say. There's no one fixed right. But
Yeah.
I really like this idea that you wrote about in your piece on validity with Ken Howe, about it needing to resonate with the population that you're studying. Like that a form of validity would be that resonates with it. And I know this is not an example from academic research, but I remember hearing David Simon, the creator of The Wired, talk once, and it was that. And he said, like, it is so important to me that people who are in unions, when they see season 2 of The Wire, say, yeah, that feels right to me. Like, that looks right. And I think that I would like that to be an ideal of research, that people who read it and are from those populations say, yeah, that feels right to me. That resonates.
Yeah, and I do think that when I say that I think the findings of qualitative research are important in the sense that they put things in a new light, or they surprise people, or they disrupt ordinary ways of thinking. I don't really mean that, I do mean resonate in a certain way. It's not resonate in the way that, in the sense that you go, oh yeah, that is my life, exactly. It's more, oh yeah, that's my life and I hadn't thought about it in that way before. So yeah, I like your point about resonating, and I think what I was saying was close to that. Yeah, and yeah. Yes.
Hi, my name is Laura. I'm the second year in the PhD program in CNI.
Uh-huh.
And I am wondering about your thoughts concerning validity for studies that have more, instead of an understanding goal, more of an emancipatory or participatory action research type of goals. I've read some studies that argue for validity to be measured on how a question is understood and how it is acted against in the research. Could you comment on that, on seeing validity in that way?
I think that's a very interesting way to think about validity. I'm not a participatory action researcher. And I'm also the kind of researcher who I feel like it's my responsibility to put out my best explanation, my most compelling explanation for the findings that I have, the work that I've done. But I don't feel like I need to take action beyond that in any particular way. I think that would be wrong of me to do that, because I am not an expert in taking action. I am more of an expert in saying, this is what I saw, this is what I found, this is what I think now. It goes out into the world, and people then take it up. I might be one of those people who take it up, but I don't take it up as the leader, as the expert, or any of that, but as a participant in it. So I think you can distinguish between the value of something for taking it up, having it out there, and having people take it seriously, and trying to encourage people to take it seriously, and then so that's one type of validity. Another type of validity is, or could be, as Patty Lather and others have argued, is to talk about catalytic validity, and take it a step further, which is to say that you want to have people take action, demonstrable action in response to this. So I think it's a different way of thinking about the responsibility of the researcher, my way versus Patty's way, let's say. And I just feel like I am really not an expert at what the action should be in response to this, other than to say I think these kinds of things should be discussed. I think they should be in part of the conversation. I think they should be taken into account when decisions are made about, or plans are being made for actions and solutions and recommendations and all those kinds of things. But I don't see that as my strength or my responsibility as a researcher. What else do we need to talk about here?
I have a question for you.
Okay. Wait, I want to go back to Leslie's point too, but go ahead.
No. Or do you want to eat your apple while?
Yes, say again what, because that was important. What you
The
were
coding part, validity as through the analytical process, or the more or less right, more or less.
Yeah, the more or less right, more or less wrong. Because okay, now I remember what I was going to say in response to that. You can push back. To me, what Maxwell, what I think he intends, or the way that I'm reading it, is not to decide whether something is wrong or right in that binary way, but to think about how could I be wrong? What mistakes might I have made? What other ways of thinking about this might there be? So, one of his big things is to consider alternative explanations or alternative hypotheses about what could be the case here, or what could be true in this situation, or what could be accurate in this situation. So I think his question is more about getting closer to an explanation that you have more confidence in. And the reason you have confidence in it is because you have evidence that you can bring to bear, and you've considered negative cases, other evidence. You have also considered other explanations, other alternatives that might be plausible, but for some reason you are deciding and arguing that they are not, and that this interpretation, finding, conclusion, whatever it is that you've given is the best one you can do with the data that you have and with the capabilities that you have.
And I think that's where having multiple people code and not necessarily code separately and then compare, although you could, but code and compare and code and compare and code and compare, that discussion is such an important part of the analysis, precisely because you are considering other conclusions or other warrants or other ways of explaining what you're seeing and deciding whether they're supported by the data or whether they're more convincing than the one you're putting forward. So I think, that it's not in a rate of reliability. It's a very different kind of process that's a better support for validity for our work, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be done individually, as
But I think I think you're pointing to the idea of a constant comparative methodology or a constant comparative approach, whether you're doing it yourself or you're doing it with other people, to trying to find ways of more clearly specifying or making more obvious what that, or more transparent what that process is. And I do think we really should think about data displays of, but displays of it that can be, so that you don't have to write all that text about it, but can show the key moments or the process, something about the process over time in a way that, even that zigzag model, some of you have been reading Cresswell's book, right? He has a zigzag model of constant comparative method. Just having a model like that, I think, is useful for people who are not familiar with this type of work to get an idea of what's involved in that process. Other issues, challenges. What happens when you go and so you've done your study and you found something really cool, and you go tell your school administrator or your boss that you found this out? It's not very flattering to that that person or that institution or that organization. Anybody worry about that? Yeah.
I
I actually have some question, but I'm not sure about asking that. And I'm just visiting scholar here. I'm from Turkey.
Uh-huh.
So I'm a lecturer and a PhD student also. So now I'm working on my dissertation, and its method will be a mixed method, and the topic is, and you may familiar than school-wide positive behavior support system.
Tell me again the topic.
School-wide positive behavior support in early childhood education.
Okay.
So which is pretty new things for Turkey too. So then in Turkey usually professors really consider about the methodology, and my question is really beginning things like I'm trying to design my methodology. So then I kind of I designed my quantitative side. But I really had difficulties about to explain my qualitative side. Like I will interview teachers and parents. So then I count my study will be qualitative too, and I was taught that I've been reading for last week tons of books and Maxwell, or I wrote down some of them. Let me say. Creswell, Janice, and Queen Patton, Michelle Queen Patton, and I was reading those people, those researchers' books about the qualitative data, find my study design. Because my study won't be ethnographic, grounded, or action research, or a pilot study. It won't. I can't count that. But one of my professors in my committee say you should do this in action way. You can count this study as an action research. And I took action class too. Then I say this study cannot be action research. I won't participate in the classroom. So the professor says, okay, you will be collaborate with teachers and directors, and you will do interview. You can say, I said no, this cannot be action. Mm-hmm. So then my question is really, do you really need to explain my qualitative study like this study will be qualitative study like ethnographic or action, or So I just said finally, this study will be qualitative study, and I will analyze my data like in content analysis. I will procedure in content analysis. I just said that, and they said still I need to read something more, I think. So maybe, what should I do? I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to pretend to be able to control your committee and what they say, but I do think that I think we are a little bit too fixated on identifying exactly what camp or what type of research design we are following. I don't think, for qualitative research, I don't think that's the spirit of the activity. Basically what you do is you're in a context, you have some idea of the kinds of information that you'd like to get and that's possible to get from that situation of those people in that context. And so you design methods that will allow you to do that. If you can interview people, great. So you develop an interview and administer it and get the results and figure out how you're going to analyze it. Same with observations and participant observation. If you can do that, great. But in some cases you can't. So I think you just have to explain why it is that you made the choices of methods that you did, given the kinds of questions that you're trying to answer, given the context that you're in and what's possible, given things like time and money constraints, and at the same time making clear why adding a qualitative component to your quantitative study is valuable, that it's giving you something that you wouldn't have otherwise. It's expanding your study in some way. It's expanding your understanding of the thing that you're trying to learn about in some important way. And I would approach it that way rather than trying to say this is action research or this is something else, you know, some other kind of type, because those are really ideal types. And very few people are following all those steps in any kind of recipe-like or linear or even complete way. The qualitative research, one of the things that's very fun about it and really advantageous is that it's flexible. You can adjust it to fit the circumstances that you are in. And in most cases you have to, because you can't just follow a strict linear progression of steps, because people don't act in the same way that atoms and molecules and other kinds of inanimate things do. You know, they fight back. They don't show up for your interviews. They don't want to answer certain questions. They don't tell you the things that you thought you wanted to hear from them. Sometimes your questions are lousy. Sometimes, you know, you have a snowstorm and you can't go to where you're supposed to be. I mean, there are so many things that are actually going on in a real context that you just, at some point, I think you have to just say, okay, this is what I did, and this is why I did it, and if you don't like it, tough. I mean, it's just like...
I never tried that before.
I really had their difficulty, and then I said, I said this is a mixed method because of my research question. So I think they are okay about that, and they really pushed me. I think.
But then another thing I would say, I mean, if you say you are doing content analysis, then you should do content analysis. Content analysis is a particular thing, and there are several versions of it. And I feel the same way about, a lot of people say, oh, I'm doing grounded theory, or I'm doing grounded theory study, or I'm using constant comparative method. Well, if you are going to say that, then you better do it. It's not just a throwaway line that, oh, I think I'll do content analysis. It means something specific. Same with narrative analysis, discourse analysis. These are in some cases, like discourse analysis, really big terms that cover an awful lot of stuff. Different kinds of approaches, from very macro to very micro, all kinds of different ways of thinking about language. You know, you can't just say I'm going to do discourse analysis. You have to do a particular kind, and if you're going to say you do it, then you need to stay as true as possible to it. And if you're going to deviate, or you have to deviate, then you need to explain to your readers or your examiners why it is you did that.
So just to clarify that and make sure about what you said, that can also say that for my qualitative design, I don't need to explain my study, or I don't need to consider my study as an ethnographic action, or...
I don't think so,
okay.
no. But you can put Eisenhart personal communication in your dissertation, and then they can come after me, but not you.
Well, I mean, I think you need to decide what you're going to do. And
I did, but I couldn't put my topic in NOE.
So first, I would ask yourself, do I really need to do mixed methods? Because doing mixed methods is really hard.
Yeah, but I think for this study, I really need to do that.
So then second, I would articulate what is the kind of qualitative data you need, and what are the techniques that are going to get that for you? Is it an interview study? Is it participant observation? Is it focus group? Like, what do you need to do? And then once you've done that, you can explain what kind of work the qualitative piece is. So I think your committee will want to know what's the category of qualitative work, because if you tell them it's an ethnography versus it's a discourse analysis, those mean very different things, and you'll have to outline the steps. But I think understanding what kind of data you need to answer your question first will then tell you how to categorize your qualitative piece, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
There's something else I think though that's also important, which is that all these types, I think, have methods associated with them. So I have never done ethnographies, but I use ethnographic methods. And these are different things, and I think the nice thing about having a history of qualitative research to build upon is that these methods have been critiqued. So if you're doing interviews, there are critiques of interviews. So you don't need to say that you're doing an ethnography, you may just be doing interviews, but you can build on work that people have done already, examining what makes, what claims we can make based on interviews. And the same with observations. When you do participant observations or just observations, when you're not part of the context, there is, I think, quite rich literature that helps us be critical of how we're doing it and very careful about designing that. And so I think I completely agree with Margaret saying that you shouldn't pigeonhole, whatever you're doing and feel like you have to morph it into something that it isn't.
I think same, but I need to prove what
Right,
I'm thinking.
but there are methods that you can use, and you can choose, like you've chosen a couple, and I think that qualitative research offers you some reflection on what each of those methods can offer you, what they cannot offer you.
I'll do it right. Perfect.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there anybody who has a burning question? You're burnt out?
So I'm doing a research about Asian international undergraduate in a globalized American university, and so this is ethnography. I did a 16-month ethnographic research with quite a number of international students, and then while I'm doing this research, I interviewed the administrator of the university as well. But what I found is, so they said they did the campus climate survey, which is basically quantitative research, several years, and they found more than 90% of international students are satisfied with education in a university, private university. But what I found is quite different from that. So I didn't debrief my finding yet, but they may think I'm lying, or I'm too extreme, or I'm only seeking some shady side of the university, like that. So how do you deal with, already they have kind of an answer about your question, although I'm not searching the satisfactory kind of process.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the question is, so you're going to find, you think you're going to find something different from what other people have reported, and you think that your findings will be discredited because they're so different from what others have found? Well, I think that one way to approach that is to think about just ways to present the data, not only the data you have from from these various surveys, but if you have other kinds of data that will support or corroborate what you have found. It might be from your own work, it might be from some other people's work. Maybe, as some people have talked about, among the group of unsatisfied students, what kinds of characteristics do they have? And you could ask whether those characteristics apply or are similar in the group that you know something about. Also, I think you could argue that the kind of data that you have overall allows you to give a much more nuanced and in-depth view of what the students are experiencing, things that might not have been captured in those surveys that asked about satisfaction. So I think you just you would make an argument for additional support for the finding that you have, assuming that you can find additional evidence, and take that as far as you can.
I'm trying to think although you are satisfied with education, but it does not necessarily mean the school does not generate the inequality or injustice.
Right. Well, yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to go there, but they were so satisfied with what they did, so I just confused who I'm interviewing, where I am.
Well, maybe a gentler way is to talk about how they need to add some additional items to their questionnaire next time that will be informed by your brilliant analysis of your study. Okay, so I'll leave you with one message, which is when you present your qualitative work, be on the offensive. Talk about the strengths. Talk about what's good, what's exciting, what's different, what's new, what's important, and don't start by saying, well, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I only had 2 people, all that. No. Go on the offensive.
And do you need a limitations section?
No, I would not put in a limitations section. That is such a stupid idea.
Now everyone's going to have an Eisenhart person.
I'm going to get a stamp so we can just stamp it. Well, thank you everyone for coming, and I'd like you to help me thank her for a great session.
Thank you. It's great talking with you, and I hope you got something out of it.
I think I did.